you know, we wanted to first and foremost, we wanted to make sure that when we talk about Quest, what role Quest Diagnostic is playing in optimizing the clinical trials, right? We'll start there, and then we'll talk in detail about how we are reimagining and using the data at scale and the touch points that we have, and the omni-channel approach to improve the enrollment planning and the recruitment needs. And I think it'll be best described by the couple of examples. So we have put together a couple of examples in the real world scenarios, and would love to talk through those. And of course, we'll wrap it up with takeaways and question and answers. So to begin with, I think we'll start first and foremost about what Quest Diagnostic. Everybody is aware of Quest Diagnostic as the lab, whether it's through a retail location or where you're getting your wellness testing done, right? What role are we playing, and what assets do we bring to the table to help the clinical trial community? So as you know, I think we are one of the leading providers of diagnostic services. But when we talk about the Quest assets, they're really in three areas, right? First and foremost, the data and the information that we have available to us at scale. So what we've been doing is we have invested quite a bit of our infrastructure and made sure that we have curated, normalized, standardized almost more than 58 billion data points from our diagnostic touch points for the patient population. So that's one, right? And we have the ongoing engagement with the patients where we almost have more than 140 million unique patient encounters. You combine that with the relationship, second anchor is that combine that with the physician relationship that we have relationship with and get the labs order from more than 50% of the physician population in the country. We have access to more than 90% US insured lives, and you combine all of that, right? I think one of the couple of the key stakeholders from a clinical trials and clinical research or drug development perspective was the patients, the providers, and the sites that they are working with. So what at Quest we do is we combine all of these assets and serve the life sciences of the pharma and the biotech industry in multiple ways. To give you a brief, quick overview, we start off with, we of course have as you see on the top of the chart, in purple, we all develop and help develop some of the companion diagnostics from all the way from discovery all the way to the commercialization. We also provide specialty lab services. But I think what I wanted to focus today for the topic of today is how do we unlock the last two arcs, where how do we leverage our data and the data services and our clinical trials solutions in helping for effective enrollment planning as well as the recruitment. So going forward, just to double click around our clinical trial solutions, right? We organize our solutions based on the use cases that and the challenges that the clinical trial community always is trying to solve. So first and foremost, on the trial design perspective, we provide a lot of the solutions and products around trial design and planning. So that whether that's around site and investigator validation identification, or whether it's painting the patient's diagnostic journey for the therapeutic area or the indication of your interest. So a lot of cohort profiling analytics, and we'll talk about how that gets leveraged in the patient enrollment and planning. The second is, as a covered entity, we are able to connect with patients based on the appropriate authorization from the patient. We're able to communicate directly to the patients for potentially matching clinical trial opportunities. And then taking a next step forward, we offer also the patient-initiated testing or sponsor-required testing to make sure that we are medically also pre-qualifying some of the patients. We tend to leverage the physician outreach as a channel, and we also have some solutions around decentralized trial, all the way from planning to the in-trial execution about, let's say, at-home or mobile phlebotomy services. So what makes Quest, and this feeds into reimagining how we reimagine the clinical trial sort of recruitment and planning perspective, is that if you think about it, I think we direct to patient and the provider relationship for 1 out of 3 US adults population. I mean, that's data at scale. We have a lot of presence in the retail location. So we have more than 2,200 patient service centers, and also joint ventures with Walmart and Safeway that can be used for outreach and sourcing of a lot of this enrollment planning. And also, I think one of the key things that I want to highlight is that having the data is one thing, but making sure it's standardized, is normalized, and made cleansed essentially to fit for use is something critical when we are making it actionable. So what we have done is we have invested quite a bit to make sure that it's, the data is curated and fit for use. So all these things, when we talk about how do we put together and what's our approach, or what our observed and the recommended approach, which of course we are coming in from a lab data perspective, but some of the principles that we are talking about and I want to talk about today with you all are transferable to any of the recruitment or trial design planning perspective. So I want to talk about a little bit of the clinical trial as a process and the unmet need. And I'm sure, given the audience and who we are fairly familiar that the complexity is increasing, the trial awareness is more, but it's not to the level that we want. There is failed enrollment. There is a stats where, more than 30%, 35% of the site do not meet their enrollment goals. So, and to add with that, with the advent of sort of the increase in the decentralization aspect of the trials, when we're talking about the traditional model where the recruitment is tied to the site, as opposed to a fully decentralized trial, it's quite a bit of sort of technology, people, and the change management that goes on, right? For even if you're not fully centralized or it's a fully virtual trial, you're making sure that sponsors are trying to make sure then optimize that, sponsors and CROs are making sure that which aspects of my trial can I optimize. So if you think about this, right, as the clinical trial model is evolving and going from purely from a site perspective to virtual sites and settling somewhere in between, what are the imperatives for success? So if you look at the bottom, right, I think, to really hyper focus and target the enrollment, you really need the patient level insights at scale as well as individually, right? So we are able to find the clinically relevant patients. Having the direct relationship with patients and providers, patients' care teams are really, really helpful when we are outreaching to the patients. And how do we engage on these different channels and make sure that our campaigns are being effective? So there is that measurement feedback loop that we almost recommend every single time when we walk into an engagement. And the way essentially we do that is, sort of this more often used word, we're often omnichannel engagement. We always start, if you look at the top left corner, in taking a study and identifying clinically relevant population. So we start with the IE criteria and try to make sure that the patient is meeting clinically pre-qualifying based on the diagnostic journey or based on the demographic information. And once we identify that candidate pool of clinically relevant patient population, we make sure that we do the outreach to our physicians and the care teams as well. One of the stats that I'm sure some version of this research, everybody must have known that more than 80% of the patient population, patient participants have said that they would consider trial as a care option if it's recommended by their physician. So we try to make sure that channel is used when we are trying to connect the right patient to the right trials. We recommend using the retail locations in the community setting as the site, sort of the area around the sites where we want to recruit for patients is increasing. Reaching where the patients and meeting the patients where they shop, live, and play is extremely important. That's why we try to make sure that the retail locations are used, whether it's patient service centers or Walmarts or Safeways or any those kind of retail locations. We try to make sure that every single campaign or the media planning that we do is anchored based on where the patients are. And close that loop to make sure that all these channels, how they are working in sort of cohesion, right? Cohesively rather, and making sure that the analytics are fueling and there is a dynamic sort of the adjustment of all the tactics that we are employing to engage with the patients for the clinical trials. And we often recommend, right? I think, there's a few use cases that I want to talk about. We often recommend that we should always start with the effective enrollment of the patients. And the omnichannel engagement starts with planning. So we often recommend our sponsors that, and we take a very solution-centric approach where we often say that, hey, give us the study criteria and your protocol, where we always start with the inclusion-exclusion criteria. Whether that can be fully satisfied with the lab data or the diagnostic information that we have or the demographics we have, it's important to start with the exclusion-inclusion criteria and try to find the patients, right patients. Overlap with the planned, future planned on the current site locations, right? Try to merge them with the NPI or the 1570 database, depending on where your current sites or the investigators are, right? And we always say that, start the trial design and planning, making sure that you're validating and de-risking essentially the enrollment activities with the site investigation, investigator validation, and what the patient prevalence is. So we often say that in the trial and design phase, we support and I recommend that make sure you validate your site list, the investigators, make sure that the relevant patient population is confirmed where you're trying to run your campaigns, right? And make sure that we establish the connections with the physician community, the primary care physicians, and the outpatient practices, which are traditionally not anchored or aware of the trials that are going on. The other thing that we often talk about is that, second use case is about the direct to patient screening. So whether it's, so once you are done with the site, sort of the trial design and planning, it comes to how do we engage with the patients. It's the same model where we always recommend starting with the inclusion-exclusion criteria, because you're really focusing on the patient population of interest, as opposed to, I think the phrase that I've heard recently is about spray and pray, right? You're broadcasting your trial information everywhere in every single format possible, right? It may work for something like a pandemic situation, but when we're talking about a hyper-focused and very curated and focused trials, I think we have to make sure that we start with the inclusion-exclusion criteria. And layering in all the planned study locations, making sure that you provide the radius of proximity, right? Traditionally, it was within 50, 100 miles of radius, but now with the decentralization of some of the trials and federating some of the services, now the radius match has expanded, right? So one of the key things that we tend to do is once you hyper-focus and get this curated patient population list, deploy your tactics, and that's where you're going to get the patient referred and screened and all those kind of things. The other one that we feel that is underutilized channel to reaching to the patients is the physician outreach. And this is different from the PIs or the site-led outreach to the patients, right? And I think I cited this stat that we came across in our market research, where 80% of the patients said that they would consider trial as a care option if it's recommended by their physicians. So making sure that we find out the patients based on the I criteria, and we recommend reaching out and engaging with the physicians, right? Because you're really talking about some sort of a behavior change and informing, because the biggest challenge that I'm sure everybody has seen in clinical trials is what's the starting point? Getting everything bootstrapped, whether it's directly through the patient or the physician community, is important, right? So as a trusted stakeholder and a trusted voice, we often recommend that let's reach out to the patients through the physician channel itself. And I think these are the different tactics that we were talking about, right? I think what we wanted to make sure is today's session is that how do we make it essentially real, right? So we wanted to talk about a couple of examples or the case studies. First example is more of the platform, that we have rolled out, and it's less about the platform, but more about how that kind of a platform, how real-world data and near real-time insights can drive your intelligent trial planning and recruitment. So we want to talk about that with a specific example. And the second case study that we wanted to share with the hepatitis delta virus HDV trial that we worked with a sponsor. So it's a real-world case study that we have conducted, and we wanted to talk about how all these principles that we are talking about, how do they come together. So the first example that we want to talk about was, it's called is through a platform that we have co-developed with Health Verity. Some of you may be aware. Health Verity provides identity, privacy, and governance environment in a privacy compliant way for aggregating the data, tokenize the data, and aggregate that and sort of merge with the third-party data sources. So Quest has partnered with Health Verity to make sure that we have a platform, a self-serve analytics platform, to interrogate the Quest data itself, right? Quest data, build a cohort of interest, and inform your planning. And I'll show you how that works, I think, but in a use case perspective. Essentially, the intent for this kind of a platform is, or this platform and the similar platform, right, is how do we find out, especially from an enrollment planning perspective, how do we find out where the right patient population is of our interest, right? Whether it's starting with the demographics filtering, right? Basic demographic filtering, the age, gender, zip codes, and all those kind of things. Second, based on their diagnosis codes, ICD-10, ICD-9, those kind of codes, as well as some of the lab tests, and not just based on the test, but filtering based on the results, right? When you combine all of these things, you're not only going to find the right patient population and where they are, but also you'll be able to group those based on the providers and sort of stratify them or divide them based on the specialty of interest, right? So for example, if you have, let's say, 100 patients with HbA1c in certain region, you'll be able to find out which providers are ordering these tests, whether it's for diagnosis, that's confirmed diagnosis, or it's a suspected diagnosis, or diagnosis for elimination, right? You're able to find out where the right patient population is and get the information about the providers as well. It's really powered with a lot of the Quest lab data, and we talked about a little bit. I think just to give you some key features of that data, it's a fully HIPAA compliant platform with a de-identified data where we have loaded five plus years of longitudinal data where user is able to build their cohorts. And so I think the best way to look at this is see it in action. But before we get there, I want to make sure that the advantage of using this in a sort of a privacy compliant tokenized form with Health Verity is we are able to combine this data. So one can build a cohort based on the lab data or the Quest data, but you can take this cohort and really merge or combine, assimilate with the third-party data sources, whether it's claims or RX or any other non-traditional data sources that may be available from the marketplace because of the tokenized information. So you can combine this data with the third-party data sources to complete the sort of the 360 view of the patient information. And one example that we have is for the triple negative breast cancer, right? So typically, so let's say a sponsor is looking for a patient cohort, whether it's an observational study or a clinical trial. How do we find those and get this insight, right? And as you can see, it's a simple sort of a three-step information process where you're really defining the patient target based on the demographic information of your interest. You're adding the codes, in this case, for the breast carcinoma, the ICD-10 codes for those patient population, right? And not only that, then you are looking for adding the lab test, and you can define not only the inclusion but also the exclusion criteria. In this case, you're adding the inclusion criteria for progesterone receptor in tissue or HER2, right? And whatever criteria that you want to find, and also what was the result of that. In this case, we're looking for triple negative, so having those negative tests, but the confirmed diagnosis is for the breast cancer. And once you build your cohort definition, you're able to find out essentially where the patient population is, what the distribution of the patient population by the age and gender, and not only that, but also who are the providers and the care team that are caring for these patients. And once you have that, you really have the very hyper-focused patient prevalence map, when you're able to plan your study, whether it's from site perspective, whether it's from PI identification or validation perspective, or even sort of employ and design where should be the right, what are the areas that we should be investing in and hyper focusing to find the patient of our interest, so we can take this information and connect with them their trial opportunity that can sort of improve the overall outcome from everybody involved. So hopefully that makes it real how data can be leveraged essentially in making sure that we are reaching to the right patient populations and the physicians. The second thing, second case study that we have is more sort of the integrated study that we talk about, like an end-to-end solution in some sense, where we worked with a sponsor where they were running a study of phase 3 hepatitis delta virus trial, where they were interested in finding out the HDV plus patients to enroll in the trial. But I'm sure some of you are aware, the HDV is often a very underdiagnosed, where many patients have hepatitis B virus, but they're not aware whether they have HDV or not. So where the sponsor, when they came to Quest, I think based on our sort of the assets that we talk about, right, data driving that omni-channel engagement, we said that, all right, first and foremost, we need to make sure that how do we locate these patients and uncover these patients. So we were able to profile the database, Quest database, and really find out where those patients are. Not only stop there, but also figure out who are the physicians who are treating these patients, because we want to make sure that we are reaching out to those physicians for this underdiagnosed condition. And then in addition to that, once we found out where the patient and the physicians are, we also, given our sort of the diagnostic side of the business, we were able to implement a sponsored testing program in a very, very short time, where not only test for HBV, but patients who were positive for HBV, hepatitis B, we were able to enroll them in a sponsored testing program for hepatitis D virus. And I think we were able to create using our channels, high touch outreach, to make sure that we do the studies pre-screening, right? So that was our plan. And the study and the whole execution of this planning, all the way from planning to execution, was very, really effective. Where what we did was, we at a de-identified level, we really took the site and the locations from the sponsor and made sure that we find out where those patients are at a de-identified level. That way, they were not able to even, not only were able to find out where the current patient population is, but if there are sites or providers that they should be reaching out to, they were able to add to their sort of the trial planning stage. Once we identified those patients, Quest was able to reach out to those patients to the proximity based on the geo mapping and the proximity to the sites. We identified more than 400 patients that were hepatitis delta positive, delta virus positive, right? And based on that, we reached out to them. Once we identified those patients, we use multiple channels, whether it's email, we use even direct mail. I think in some cases it was calling as well, based on their appropriate HIPAA authorization for us to contact them for clinical research. And once we were able to engage with them, we matched them up and referred to the local sites. Once the step 3 is, we didn't stop that. We didn't stop at the referral, but made sure that to complete the patient experience, we were able to do the sponsored testing program. And once that sponsored testing program was done, I think that led to the effective enrollment. So where we started was really from taking a look at the whole sort of a near real-time data, all the way to finding out the right patient, finding out the right physician population that is caring for it, implement the pre-screening and the medical screening program, and making sure that the patient experience is optimized all the way to the enrollment phase. So
Parag, yes. I'm so sorry to cut you off. We are at time.
Okay.
We can stick around possibly another minute, but there are some questions in the chat. But unfortunately, I need to close the session.
Sure.
So if you have a final comment.
No, this is the last slide, I think, before the takeaway. So I would love to take the questions, actually. So let me see if there are questions in the chat. Are there any questions in the audience that I should take first? Or...
Do we have any questions here in the audience?
Yeah.
No,
so
I don't see any.
Okay, so there's couple of questions in the chat. I'll pick one, I guess, given the time.
Yes, please.
Yeah, there's a question from Jeremy. I think earlier you discussed having lab agreements at Walmart. Do you have data aggregation agreements with them to match labs to pharmacy data? So yes, Quest has the joint venture with Walmart. So we do have the Quest patient service centers in, I think, 70 plus Walmart locations. We have specific data use and data agreements. It's really based on what kind of a study we are running around, and it's really driven by the sponsors and the study specific things. As far as matching it with the pharmacy data, I think we encourage matching with the pharmacy data with the tokenized engine, like a third-party data providers and the tokenized engine, because of the re-identification risk. So yes, we can do that. There are ways to do that, but it's not something that we bring in-house and do it for compliance and re-identification risk reasons.
Very good. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
So our breakout sessions will be starting out here in the foyer. What you'll do is you'll just come out here and head to the right, and you can select any one table.